What is biology? Biology is the scientific study of life. Biology is rooted in the biologist's desire to understand the world around them. Biologists use the scientific method in order to explain our living world. The scientific method begins with observe and research, and then you ask a question. Then you make a hypothesis, an educated guess, and then you conduct an experiment in order to see if your guess is right or not. Then you analyze your results. You come up with a conclusion, and then you have to report those results. Now, biology is not a science that stands alone. It calls on many other sciences in order to explain biological phenomenon. For instance, we use chemistry in order to explain the interactions between biological molecules. We use physics to explain the roots and the limits of biological interactions. We also use anatomy and physiology in order to explain the form and function of biological organisms. However, biology cannot be overlooked. Biology explains why the world's deserts are where they are. Biology explains why someone can be killed by microscopic murderers. Biology also explains why a unseen error can result in a physical deformity. Today, I will talk about what does it mean to be alive, cell theory, what is a cell, 4 similarities between all cells, central dogma, and the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms. So what does it mean to be alive? What is life? Cell theory states that all living organisms are made of cells. The cell is the smallest living unit, and all cells come from pre-existing cells. Keeping those facts in mind, let's examine an amoeba, a rock, a mushroom, a clothespin, and a virus. An amoeba is a single-celled organism that uses finger-like projections from its cell membrane in order to move and feed. Those finger-like projections are called pseudopodia. An amoeba is made of a cell. An amoeba comes from a parent cell. Therefore, an amoeba is alive. A rock. A rock is made of sediments. A rock can come from larger rocks, boulders, or a rock can come from the solidification of non-living elements. Therefore, a rock is not made of cells. A rock does not come from pre-existing cells, so a rock is not alive. A mushroom. A mushroom is the visible reproductive portion of a fungi that grows underground. The mushroom comes from extensions of the cell body called mycelia. Therefore, a mushroom is made of cells and it comes from cells, so a mushroom is alive. A clothespin, sort of a tricky one. A clothespin is made of wood, but the tree is no longer alive and it contains metal. A clothespin comes from a factory, not from a parent cell. Therefore, a clothespin is not alive. A virus. A virus is a protein capsule and genetic material. A virus inserts its genetic material into a host cell in order to use that host cell's protein synthesis machinery to replicate itself. So a virus may come out of a cell, but it doesn't come from a cell, and it is not made of cells. Therefore, a virus is not alive. We will continue to look at being alive and life as being made of cells and coming from a pre-existing cell. So, what is a cell? A cell is the smallest fundamental unit that can perform certain functions unassisted. A cell must be able to obtain and use energy. It must be able to grow. It must be able to protect itself from the outer world, and a cell must be able to reproduce. If a cell lacks or loses any of those functions, it will die. Now, all cells have 4 similarities. All cells have a plasma membrane that encloses the cell. All cells have cytosol, which is a jelly-like substance inside of the cell. All cells have genetic material in the form of deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA for short, that is held inside of chromosomes. All cells also have ribosomes, which are the protein synthesis machinery. Those 4 similarities are consistent across all levels of life. The plasma membrane is a semi-permeable barrier that only allows certain elements in and out of the cell. Plasma membrane helps keep the cells inside constant. And all cells have a plasma membrane. Cytosol is the jelly-like substance that all of the cell's elements float around in. All cells contain cytosol. Now, DNA. DNA is the genetic material that all cells have. DNA is the instructions for building and maintaining a cell. DNA is also the hereditary element that is passed down from parent to offspring. All cells contain DNA that is kept inside of structures called chromosomes. All cells also have ribosomes. Ribosomes are necessary in order to create proteins. Now, both eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells, which we'll talk about later, have ribosomes. Their ribosomes differ in size, but they perform the exact same function. Now, central dogma. Central dogma states that DNA goes to RNA and goes to protein. Central dogma explains the flow of information in a cell. Protein complexes called RNA polymerase read the genetic material, DNA, and they then write a transcript called RNA, or ribonucleic acid. Ribosomes then read this RNA and they translate it into a protein. Now, all of the DNA in an organism is collectively referred to as the organism's genome. Pieces of the genome are read separately and individually. Each piece of the genome that encodes for a protein is referred to as a gene. So, RNA polymerase reads a gene and then it writes a RNA transcript in order for the ribosome to read the RNA transcript and then create a protein. The process going from DNA to RNA is called transcription because DNA and RNA are related. They're almost the same. So you just write a transcript. The process of going from RNA to a protein is called translation because RNA is completely different from the protein that is created. So, there are major differences in all cells. If we start with there are two main cell types, prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Now, eukaryotic cells carry their genetic material, their DNA, inside of chromosomes, inside of a membrane-bound nucleus. The nucleus is visible inside of the cell, and that's where the DNA is kept for all eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells lack a membrane-bound nucleus. The chromosomes of prokaryotic cells are just floating in the cytosol. That would be the first main difference. Now, in eukaryotic cells, we also have other membrane-bound structures called organelles. Organelles are, as their name insists, many organs. Organelles each have their own functions that they perform inside of the cell. Organelles allow compartmentalization of cellular functions. That increases the complexity of eukaryotic organisms. Prokaryotic cells lack organelles altogether. Now, another difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes is the structure of their chromosomes. Eukaryotes all have linear chromosomes, and many of them. Now, prokaryotes have circular chromosomes, and they'll usually have one or a few. Now, prokaryotic cells are much smaller than eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotes are simpler and smaller, and eukaryotes are much larger and more complex. However, this complexity also limits the cell size. Surface area to volume must stay small in order for the cell to obtain the nutrients necessary as well as to excrete the waste. If the cell gets to be too large, it has a very unfavorable internal environment and the cell will die. Now, understanding life's differences and similarities help us to make connections between the underlying DNA and the organism that we see. If you're curious about the nucleus of an organism, but you do not have a microscope handy, you can make some generalizations in order to help you classify that organism. All prokaryotes are single-celled and microscopic, which means you probably won't be able to see them without a microscope. All eukaryotes can be either single-celled or multicellular, and they're much more complex in form and function. Both our mushroom and our amoeba are eukaryotic organisms. Evolution is the idea that all life arose from a common ancestor. That ancestor's DNA has diverged or changed so much over millions of years that it has given rise to all of the different organisms on the planet. Evolution will be a common thread as we continue to dive deeper into biological concepts. From the single cell in a test tube to a pack of wolves in Russia, evolution is the underlying theme. And as we continue to talk, let's examine what makes this organism live. What makes this organism be able to outlive other organisms? Thank you.